Okay, so the difference between maths and economics is that the context changes around economics. And as we've looked at with Playlist 1, we are the context that's changed around these systems. Women's changing roles, changing family structures, the emergence of safeguarding systems, equality legislation, the relationship of these to our other systems, like our cash transfer system and our economic policy, is what's actually at stake here. There is no recognition of these systems. And that's what I say. When I say that Labour can only survive if they accept intersectionality, I don't mean they have to accept a theory base. I mean they have to recognise the existence of these systems, and particularly the trade unions. They also have to. And the Conservatives have to recognise these systems now, because they've generated such massive institutional failure that they will not get out of this situation until they have acknowledged these systems. Now, the problem is that now acknowledging these systems means acknowledging what's been done in the last 8 years to avoid recognition of these systems, and that has been the politics of blame. And that has resulted in the deaths of possibly a 6-figure death toll, which is, as a person who is contained within that population, who is one of the people that the country have just said, yeah, that can happen to you, and that the rule of law can be taken away, that's particularly distressing to me. But this was by consent. This was by complete public consent. Whereas, I'd like to say it wasn't. Now, what Twitter has given us in the meantime for 8 years is, because they've created an echo chamber around existing media institutions and our political establishment and policy-making culture, and because they have had to recreate social relations on Twitter to keep themselves insulated from that context, we've seen a really cast-iron demonstration, particularly through the social network around Dawn Foster and The Guardian and the Labour left and Corbyn, of the mechanisms that we will use to prevent ourselves seeing that change context. And so through this social network, what you see is a very interesting phenomena. Now, what's really interesting with people who are trying to protect a false identity, it's like watching a rowboat with one oar. Have you ever seen that? Like, if you've just got a one oar going with a boat, it'll just go round and round and round in circles. And that's kind of what they're doing on Twitter. And as narcissists, because that's what this is, it's a narcissism, are wont to do, they have eventually come full circle and demanded the conversation that they just tried to prevent. So as well as demonstrating what we learned under the rise of the Nazis about how if you don't reflect on power and you create objects to project your dysfunction onto, you can recreate abusive relations. And while this has been demonstrated in a period where 100,000 people have died, and we've seen the people, specifically who were involved in trying to prevent discussion of that consensus by manufacturing tribalism, how they have responded to people asking them not to do that. And that's been that they believe that they're being bullied. But they've still ended up demanding the conversation that they tried to prevent. So by using trans as a cudgel, they have jeopardised trans rights. The word TERF has jeopardised trans rights because it has conflated trans rights with male pattern abuse. But what that has also done is it has demanded the conversation about these systems. So women are now organically, this is happening organically. This is not just happening in England, this is happening in lots of countries. But the UK is very specific because we have a whole bunch of other stuff that is coming together around austerity. And actually we're kind of, they refer to the post-war settlement as the UK-US Washington Consensus, and that's actually ending at the same time. So we're at a very, very, very particular point with this issue. So the people who have tried to kind of not adapt to change context and not recognise these systems have spent 8 years preventing it, using kind of like this narcissistic Labour left kind of identity to prevent discussion of consensus. And now, here we are in 2018, not only have they requested that conversation, not only are women having that conversation, but they're having it at a point in time where the Labour left, in their efforts to prevent discussion of this consensus, have been so obnoxious, so dangerous, so appalling, that their own party want to move past them, the Tories want to move past them, and everybody else does. And the institutional failure that they have generated in trying to prevent that discussion is so big that everybody has to. So here we are at this little point where actually the only thing that women have to do to make this fall apart is stand up and meet publicly, which we're doing everywhere. And we don't have to. I know sometimes these playlists and these videos are a bit obtuse, because what goes on in my head is marginal. Like, my perspective is it's a distortion. It's not, you know, it's not the norm. And you don't have to know the things that I do, and you don't have to read the people that I read. But what you have to know is that the reason that they've had to create a poisonous bubble around themselves on Twitter and try and get women out of it is because you just existing blows their shit up.